Joining me now is a good friend of the program and kind of my spiritual advisor, one of them. John Nichols is one of the pioneers of modern left writing online and in print. He writes about politics for The Nation magazine as its national affairs correspondent, and he is also the author of a number of great books, including the latest, which he co-authored with Robert McChesney, which we talked about here on this show, People Get Ready, The Fight Against a Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy. And he joins us now to talk about what else, the new president of the United States. First of all, John, thanks for coming on the program.
It is always an honor to be with you, my son.
Yes, that's right. Forgive me for I have sinned. Now, that said, you wrote a piece for The Nation I liked a lot called a resolution for 2017, keep reminding Trump that he has no mandate. Now, of course, every incoming president, every incoming Congress claims that it has a mandate. And we learned that even with Obama's clear victories and even when Democrats held both houses of Congress, Republicans asserted they did not. What is the case for saying that Trump has no mandate?
It's a very strong case, and it's one that we ought not let be shoved aside or neglected as this new presidency begins. As you well noted, 8 years ago, Barack Obama really did have a mandate. He won an overwhelming majority of the popular vote. He won a great majority in the Electoral College. He also had a House and a Senate elected with very strong Democratic majorities, which were based not on gerrymandering, but on genuine popular vote. And so Obama came to office with, something you could point to as a mandate. You can debate whether it was big enough or, how it compared, say, to that of Lyndon Johnson in 1964 or, Franklin Roosevelt in the classic elections of the 1930s and 1940s. But clearly, it was in that category. What Trump has received is not that. And I give that little bit of history up front to give us some perspective on this. Elections are different. They produce different kinds of results. In this election, Donald Trump fell dramatically short of the measures of a mandate. And he did so not just on his own, but also in the allied Congress that has been formed out of this election. Donald Trump was opposed in this election by 54% of the people who cast ballots. Only 46% of those who cast ballots voted for Donald Trump. Notably, that's a lower figure than voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, and we certainly didn't say that Mitt Romney had a mandate to be president of the United States. And it's significant on another level because not only did Donald Trump fall far short of a majority of the vote, he also fell 3 million votes behind his key opponent, Democrat Hillary Clinton. So, majority of people didn't want him as president. Clear plurality of people favored his opponent for the presidency. And then if we look over at the Congress, what we find is that in the United States Senate, the Republican vote for U.S. Senate candidates was around 42%, 43%. Now, some of my Republican friends will say that, of course, you can't look at Senate races quite in the same way as presidential. Not every state had a race. And in some states, you had quirky things like the California race where there were 2 Democrats on the November ballot. But that objection is rooted in an acknowledgement that the Republicans in California were so pathetically weak, they couldn't get a candidate on the November ballot.
Right,
so it's hardly a defense of their position.
Right, because they couldn't even mount somebody who got the second best number of votes.
That's exactly right. So in the Senate, you hardly have an argument that there's some great mandate there. And remember, this is the Senate that will deal with cabinet picks and core policies. And then the House of Representatives led by Paul Ryan. Now, Paul Ryan has been very busy running around claiming that Donald Trump has a mandate, that the Congress has a mandate to act on all sorts of fundamental issues, even potentially assaults on Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. And yet, Paul Ryan does not have a mandate. Only 49% of people who cast ballots in congressional races voted for Republican candidates. Wasn't a majority. Now, they have a slight plurality there on the Republican side, but let us not forget that the courts are currently dealing with a host of cases, some of which already decided in favor of the plaintiffs, arguing that the House of Representatives and frankly, our legislative seats around the country are so radically gerrymandered that they don't produce an accurate accounting of where the voters are. So, no mandate for Trump, no mandate in the Senate, and no mandate in the House of Representatives. They have power, no doubt about that. We can accept that reality. But they certainly cannot say that when they use that power to assault the structural underpinnings of the American political balance, if you will, at this point. And that includes, all sorts of, major initiatives we can talk about in a little bit. But also when they assault basic programs that are incredibly popular in America, they can't say they're doing that on behalf of the American people because the American people did not vote for that.
Yeah,
in fact,
and I
would even go one step further and say the American people did not, many people who even voted for Trump didn't vote for many of the things that he and some of his people are now talking about doing.
Yeah, I think that's very important, and I think that I'm glad we're talking about this, John Nichols, because I think that it's something that needs to be said forcefully and clearly, this issue that the Republicans and Trump himself do not have a mandate to do what they want to do, especially since what they're talking about doing is a fundamental dismantling of the social contract that this country has operated under for many, many decades. So I think that's very important. I'll tell you where I've had some ambivalence on that whole argument, and it's not huge, but it's a nuance that I think we can't lose sight of, which is sometimes when I hear Democrats, dedicated mainstream party Democrats, say we really won, they don't have a mandate, I almost hear them saying the Democratic Party doesn't need to fundamentally change its platform in response to electoral defeats at all levels, including only 18 of the governorships in the country and only less than a third of the state houses and so on. At all levels, there's a problem because Russia did it or because this one did it or because that Comey did it. And whatever the legitimacy of the no mandate arguments, I want to make that argument somehow while at the same time not losing sight of the fact that the Democratic Party needs to re-engineer itself along lines that would make it much stronger among populations where people either don't support it or don't turn out to vote for it. What do you think of that dimension of this issue?
Well, as you know, and we should reveal to listeners that we know each other pretty well. And, we have often wrestled with one another, arm wrestled, just so people know that, over who is more critical of the failures of the Democratic Party, you or me. And I would like to assert that while you are physically stronger, I've often and so with that said up front,
I don't think you'll argue, though, I drop more F-bombs.
Oh, you are amazing. The videos are they're a YouTube sensation. But this is a big deal. When I state my concerns, when I put my numbers forward and our numbers forward as regards the question of a mandate, I really do see this as talking about something, about the current circumstance that we're in, that Donald Trump is going to take the oath of office in late January. He will then have a Congress associated with him. And how do you object? How do you oppose? How do you stand up? Well, one of the most important things you say is there's not a mandate for what these folks are doing here.
Mm-hmm.
However, as regards what you have just said, and this is a painful and difficult thing to say, but it is simply reality. Politics is about figuring out the parameters, the lines, the rules of the field on which you are playing, and determining how to win, even if you are up against an opponent who stacks the deck, who plays the game in a bad way, who takes advantage of structural flaws or problems. Your job as a political party is to figure out how to prevail. And the Democrats do a lousy job of that. They do a lousy job at the state and the national level because, and here's the key to it, they got 3 million more votes for president. I mean, it was quite striking. And yet they didn't have a sufficient electoral college strategy so that they could get the roughly 75, 80,000 votes they needed in the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to prevail. You know what I mean? This is, and I want to really emphasize, that's not tough stuff. We're not talking about a big failure here. We're talking about micro managing. This is little stuff that they needed to do. They lost rural counties that have voted Democratic for generations. Now, that was something that could have been addressed if the Democratic Party had had a smart rural strategy.
Right.
Simple as that.
And
things like that.
Exactly right, John Nichols. And I think that in my personal philosophy is that every minute spent talking about how you were victimized and cheated, and we know the Democratic Party was in many ways victimized and cheated. Every minute you spend dwelling on that is a minute not spent, figuring out how to win and then reconfigure the rules of the game so that they're fair. So in a couple minutes that we have left, I want to talk about, I'm totally with you at this point on the fact that these guys do not have a mandate. Now, one of our mutual frustrations, I think, about the Democratic Party for years has been this desire to compromise with somebody that wants to destroy you rather than accept that desire to destroy you is part of the problem. You have to acknowledge. On Medicare and Social Security, particularly, Trump ran, as I've been saying all along, and I know you've been saying, is a different kind of Republican who wouldn't cut these programs. If anything, I would say on those issues specifically, Democrats have got to say you have no mandate to change this. This is not what voters want. You have no mandate to make any major changes, but this will be the first place where we drive a stake in the ground and say, no, you cannot move on this the way you want to. What do you think?
Well, I think that's practical politics as well as realistic assessment. And Bernie Sanders and a number of others have been raising this issue, literally putting Trump's tweets up and arguing, look, this is what you said during the campaign. You were elected on this premise. You cannot violate it. Obviously, there are members of Congress that are desperate to mess with and mangle these vital programs. And so it is a great place in which to draw the line. I think some of the initial lines may be drawn also on some of the cabinet picks, as well as the Obamacare vote, which could kind of bleed into debates about particularly Medicaid. And so there's, we recognize that we're moving into a circumstance where folks will have to move on many levels and look at many, many different threats and concerns. However, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the defense of these essential programs is going to be at the heart and soul of any kind of real battle going forward, where I think Democrats in Congress, as well as folks across the country, have the potential to really gain the upper hand. And this is both a political battle, but it's also a moral battle, a human battle, because we're talking about people's health and their lives. And it becomes very, very important to go to the heart of the matter on this. And one final component, we've talked about mandates and whether Trump has a mandate, whether Republicans in Congress have a mandate. It's within Trump's own vote, the 46% of the vote that he did receive. It is very important to recognize there are millions and millions, tens of millions of people who are threatened by any assault on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And it is very important for progressives, for Democrats, for others, to speak to Trump voters and say very clearly, did you really vote to undermine your Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? Did you really vote to weaken protections for minors who are ailing in Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia? Did you really vote to, gut out and undermine rural health care programs? I don't think so. And so There are many levels on which to communicate, and Democrats, progressives ought to be communicating on all of them.
And progressives have got to be willing to talk to those Trump voters and not just dismiss them all, but understand that they will respond to a positive agenda. So last point that I'm going to make, John Nichols, is that I think it's also important for Democrats, while they're explaining that Trump has no mandate, to create the mandate that they have, which is more than just not being Trump. It's to say, we are the party that will expand Social Security. We are the party that will give you Medicare, in my opinion, Medicare for all. We are the party that has an affirmative vision of the future, not just the people who think Trump is a bad person, although he is. And I guess I'll just close on that thought, if that's okay with you. 30 seconds.
I'll give you 30 seconds. I've suggested this before. There are folks who say that Democrats are going to have to negotiate with Republicans in Congress on, ending Obamacare or on, all these other issues. And I've just said, I think that the Democrats should just appoint Bernie Sanders as their negotiator.
Perfect.
He could start with single-payer Medicare for all, and then they can make their case, and we'll probably, we might settle in the middle of keeping what's good about Obamacare and hopefully even expanding a little bit of Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I'd be more inclined to, quote unquote, give the new president a chance if he hadn't told me what he wanted to do. So, John Nichols of The Nation, hey, thanks so much for coming back on the show. Great to talk to you, and thanks for covering this topic.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, my friend.
Talk to you soon.